I'm David Pell with Ohio Election Forum. Here tonight, Dean Glover, Matt Doc Truman, Eric Alberts from Ohio Election Forum, and our special guest star tonight, who's going to blow your mind, folks. You might think you know about what's all baked into issue 1, but this guy here, Jason Feliciano, is going to really tell you about stuff he's researched and the real hidden meaning behind some of this. Now, I want to preface, because we did put up a post the other day and everyone liked it, where it said, hey, keep it simple, right? If you're talking to the masses, you know, if you're standing at a football game and people are going in and you're saying, hey, vote against this thing, they're going to take away your parents' rights. They're going to do abortion up to the day of birth, right? That's probably the most effective thing. But Jason here has a couple things that are going to be very interesting to you, that if that doesn't work and you have some more time, these might be just as effective or better, I think. So without further ado, tell us about your background, because I think you have some legal background, if I recall correctly. Go ahead.
So my background is I have written a couple documents for the United States Supreme Court, 2 amicus briefs, one in 2015 defending Ohio's marriage law, and one in 2022 defending against the OSHA Biden vaccine mandate. When I wrote that, it was myself and the military chaplain endorsers, and then in 2015, that was myself and 18 Starr County pastors that we submitted that. So that's a little bit of my background. I've worked on statewide political campaigns since 2004, successful political campaigns, and I understand legal language like some people understand novels. It's easy for me to follow through and to be able to break down what exactly we're going through. And that's actually one of the reasons why we're here this evening, is to talk about a constitutional amendment that is currently being proposed for the state of Ohio. And as you're well aware, that constitutional amendment will be in the ballot boxes from October 11th all the way through November 7th. And we're encouraging people, as you can see behind me, to vote no on issue 1. And the reason why this is such a critical election is because this constitutional amendment will change the framework by which we look at certain laws. And some of those laws is why we're here today. We're going to talk about some of that today.
Why don't we first dig in, like you said and because I've seen you speak on some of these things, you said you had effectiveness with a couple of different approaches in talking about issue 1. So why don't we start with that for those people that might be interested in how they can get a leftist over to their side, maybe.
Yeah, so what we've discovered is there are 4 things that are going to happen with this constitutional amendment. There are a few more, but we're going to focus on 4 major ones. Most people are already talking about the fact that this will legalize abortion up to the moment of birth. And they are correct. The constitutional amendment allows, if a woman claims it's for her mental health or emotional health, under the guise of health, that it can be an abortion up to the moment of birth. And that is correct. And other people have also pointed out clearly and truthfully that this constitutional amendment will also allow minors seeking abortion or minors seeking transgender hormones or surgery without parental consent, notification, or involvement. That is also true. But what we also discovered was this constitutional amendment, as written, will also make legal adult-child sexual relationships. And it will also legalize, and this is the big one, prostitution in the state of Ohio with no age restriction. And so the way that happens is the constitutional amendment says every individual has the right to make and carry out one's own reproductive decisions. And as you know, the word reproductive decisions means any decision dealing with the action of sex or sex organs. That's why people can rightfully say that this will be connected to the transgender issue. But again, you'll notice that the word individual does not have an age restriction. The word individual means person separated from the group, which is why parents are losing their parental rights, because the minor can make a decision and the parent will lose their veto power over that decision. But the other thing that we see is that it will legalize prostitution. And here's why. If a person claims it is their reproductive decision, which is the exact legal language that is given in the constitutional amendment, if a person claims it's the reproductive decision to have sex and get paid for it, the state cannot make any law against it. The state cannot burden penalize, prohibit, interfere with, or discriminate against either an individual's voluntary exercise of this right or a person or entity that assists an individual exercising this right. Now, that second portion, a person or entity, means an adult can exploit a youth or child legally. Now, why do we say adults and children will be affected by this? It goes back to that word individual. The word individual, as you are aware, does not have an age restriction. That means all adults and minors are included in that description. So the same legal framework that would apply to an adult would apply to a minor. Now, the other reason why we have said that this will legalize adult-child sexual relationships is for that same very point. The minor or the adult now is legally entitled, according to the Ohio Constitution, Article 1, Section 22, that they're introducing this November into the state of Ohio, that will make the minor or adult have the exclusive right, according to the Ohio Constitution, to make and carry out a reproductive decision. And that is why we're saying that an adult can make that decision with whom they want to have relations with, and a minor will be empowered by the constitutional amendment to make that same decision. Whether they choose to have that type of relationship with an adult or a minor, they will be empowered by this new language that's introduced to the Ohio Constitution. As a quick recap, what we have is, if Ohio passes this as written, and we've looked at different constitutions, we've looked at different laws across many nations, Ohio would become one of the most permissive places on earth to allow this type of activity. And again, the reason why is because most other places, even if they have legalized the action of prostitution, they have an 18 or older restriction. That would not be in Ohio. Ohio would have 0 age restriction, and so therefore it would be one of the most permissive places, unfortunately, on earth.
Well, and I think the thing that struck me too is when you're talking about, legalized prostitution under this, right? But it's even more wicked because the clause that says the state shall not directly or indirectly burden, penalize, prohibit, interfere, or discriminate against a person or entity that assists an individual in exercising this right. Essentially, it's making the pimps bulletproof, right? You can do that. You're assisting them in their way to make money.
Yeah, so I mean, like Damon said at the top, right? You're gonna blow our minds, and honestly, to me, that describes exactly how twisted these people are, right? I would have never thought in a million years that language would mean some of the things you stated there, but I could see from a legal perspective, it's not a restriction. It doesn't say anything about prostitution. It doesn't say anything about transgenderism directly, right? But to your point, it's not saying that under 18 has to have parental consent either. It's not calling it out, which means, I think you're stating basically from a legal perspective, as far as we know, that the child can do if they want. The adult can have that sexual relation with a child. That adult or child could be out there on the streets prostituting, or their parents forcing them to, or the illegals that come up here that are forced to survive, whatever the case may be. That's kind of what we're saying, right? Because the law is so loose and it's reproductive, that's a huge umbrella for anything reproductive related, which is in sex, right?
Dean, before Jason put something in there, I just want to add too, and Jason, right? This is a legal thing because in the section A of the amendment, when it says that you have an individual who can carry out their own reproductive decisions, including but not limited to, that is a very explicit type of language in the law. Basically, it's saying, hey, I'm just giving you 1 or 2 examples, but there's everything else you can think of. It's basically saying, whatever I'm saying here that's explicit, forget it, because I'm saying it's everything, but just make sure it's these things.
That is correct. That is correct. And the exact legal language that you pointed out, just for clarification, it's voluntary. So it has to be someone's voluntary exercise. It does not allow a person to be forced. The person has to voluntarily choose this. But you're correct. The word that says not limited to means that this constitutional amendment is not exclusively the tiny list that they give us. And we've seen that. We've seen that in court case after court case. The ACLU is currently litigating in multiple states that minors have the right and parents have lost their parental rights in state after state after state. So this is currently what they are litigating in court in 2023. And so they are the ones who wrote this constitutional amendment, and this is the type of language they purposefully introduced into the Ohio Constitution.
Has this type of ballot language been seen anywhere else in any other state that you know of?
So they have done 3 constitutional amendments in the United States in the last year. One was the Michigan Constitutional Amendment, one was the California Constitutional Amendment, and one was the Vermont Constitutional Amendments. Now, those constitutional amendments, for example, Michigan, it specifically said decisions dealing with pregnancy. So it pigeonholed that specific type of action to the action of pregnancy or to the situation of pregnancy. The Michigan language was passed last November. And then the ACLU and Planned Parenthood took about 6 months before they introduced the Ohio language. But when they introduced the Ohio language, they purposefully changed the language to include every individual having the right to make and carry out their own reproductive decisions. You will notice that the word decisions is the right that a person is given. Because you know that the state cannot regulate what a person decides in their head, but you know that the state can regulate what a person does. And so that is why we are seeing that this Ohio language is new. It's different. It's not like the Michigan language. It's not like the California or Vermont language. It is exclusively different. But I will say this. It's not exclusively different in the fact that Ohio is the only place where this language has been introduced. As a matter of fact, Ohio is the first place where this language has been introduced, and we're the only ones that have it on the ballot in November of 2023. But the ACLU and Planned Parenthood, through initiative ballot petitions, have introduced very similar language to 17 other states in the last 2 to 3 months. So we're seeing that the Ohio language is what is being mimicked in all these other states.
So, it's really scary, right? What we're saying, or what you're saying, is they learned from their mistakes to not be low enough to conclude, to not have as many restrictions on all these things we've been talking about. Now, I think the question is similar to what I believe was Doc asked. But so, do we have any data, or do you have any data on some of these laws that might have been passed or are already in place in some of these other less restrictive states that have gone into that direction, the prostitution, the all those negatives? Do we have anything like, hey, is there a correlation between, hey, this bill was passed at this date, 1 year later, and now we're seeing a spike in, say, prostitution or crime, or just have something like that, or maybe child kidnappings even? I mean, anything like that? I know it might be too early, but just curious, how bad is, what is the influence of these laws out there?
Well, what I will point out is the ACLU has actually exclusively told us that this was their goal. 3 years ago, in 2020, the ACLU wrote a 34-page document describing these following things. First, they wrote an article that said sex work is real work and it's time to treat it that way. That's found on the ACLU's website. If you scroll down through the middle of that document, it'll say that the ACLU has been committed to sex work decriminalization since 1973, and it became official board policy in 1975. Since then, affiliates across the nation have advocated for decriminalization at the state level, and that's where we're at. Now, then the ACLU published a 34-page document that I referenced a few moments ago. And that 34-page document is entitled ACLU Research Brief, Why Decriminalize Sex Work? Now, it's 34 pages, and they have 159 references to prove their point that this is their goal. But when you go down to page 18, under recommendations, the ACLU says that they're committed to sex work decriminalization. And then when you scroll down, it says that their goal is to decriminalize all consensual sex work, including prostitution among adults, fully decriminalize by eliminating all criminal penalties for sellers and buyers, and remove all criminal penalties for youth. Did you hear that? Youth who participate in sex work. They go on and they say that it should have a retroactive component, expunging of criminal records. So this is their goal. They have stated this on their own website. They have referenced it many times. As a matter of fact, they have 159 references to prove their point that this is what they want to do. Go state by state, and Ohio would become the first state to legalize it with no age restriction. As you know, Nevada does have legalized prostitution in areas that have under a certain population limit, but those areas, again, is not the situation that Ohio is dealing with, because Ohio would make it legal with no age restriction. One of the most permissive places on earth to do so.
And no parental rights.
Yeah, and Dean, to your point, I know in one of these other videos recently, I was doing some research and I saw Michigan. Whitmer has already introduced, stuff saying, hey, we gotta whack away at some of these parents' rights. So they've begun less than a year later. They've begun already the effort. I think they wait a little while. They get everyone get comfortable, and then they start doing their wickedness, I think.
And speaking specifically about the parental rights issue, we saw the exact thing happen in the state of Alaska. In the state of Alaska, they introduced a constitutional amendment that actually removed parental rights. But then the next year, citizens and the legislator realized that this was something that was important, and they began to create parental rights when it came to abortion or for minors, that there would have to be certain restrictions or certain notifications that the parent would have to be notified before a minor seeking abortion could have an abortion. Well, guess what? The ACLU took it all the way to the Supreme Court of Alaska. And the Alaska Supreme Court ruled that they don't have the authority to decide on moral issues, but rather they only have the authority to decide on what the law says. And what the Constitution said was that the parents did not have their parental rights, and it was struck down. So this is something that the ACLU has done and has been working on in different places across the nation.
But I keep going back to or thinking back to the story that made national headlines for the 10-year-old girl that went from Ohio to Indiana to have an abortion, and I just keep thinking about like how that influenced the wording that we have now. We have on the ballot that there's the individual. So obviously, I just keep thinking, okay, that was in mind when the language was being drafted.
Well, I think, Eric, I think it's more along the lines. I get where you're going, and I think where I'm taking that is the assisting, right? The assisting, because that was part of the thing. Like, well, if you take the child across state lines to a state that allows it, isn't that illegal, right? For that person to do that. And that's where this is giving blanket coverage. Or, there's so many scenarios, right?
Yeah. I mean, just the broad language of it. It's like, I don't want, one reason I don't want to see this pass is like, I don't want to have this broad language tested.
So one thing that is currently being talked about is that in the advertisements right now, the people who are trying to pass this constitutional amendment, they keep saying things like, well, a 6-week abortion ban does not have any exemptions for rape or incest. And someone recently pointed out and said, neither does your issue 1, which is interesting. But on the other hand, the other more sinister situation is that issue 1 will actually empower the adult-child sexual relationships to become legal, as long as both parties consent, or as long as both parties say that they are voluntarily exercising their own reproductive decision in doing that. So those people who say, hey, this is an evil thing, and we agree, it is evil for adult-child sexual relationships, that is not okay. But to those people who say, well, we need to pass issue 1 because of that, I'm here to tell you that issue 1 will empower the very thing that you're against. Because issue 1 will cause adult-child sexual relationships to become legal in the state of Ohio. If the minor and the adult decide that it is their own reproductive decision, it is now a legal situation. And in the state of Ohio, we do have statutory rape laws. We do have laws that prevent adults and minors from having sexual interactions. For example, a person who is under 16 cannot have connection with someone who's over 20, or a person who is under 13 cannot have a connection with someone who's over 18. Those laws are currently on the books, but if you change the Constitution of Ohio, then the laws that we currently have will become invalidated in circumstances where it can be proven or it can be stated that both parties are doing it voluntarily. So again, you're taking out the teeth out of our current laws that do protect minors from this type of behavior.
Right, and then the what was it? The court battle that happened recently regarding the what we're basically was saying that to the ballot drafters that you didn't specify which laws would be affected, or which parts of the Ohio Constitution or laws would be affected if this ballot passed, and the response was we don't have to, which I guess they don't, but I just hate that it's like that it's people like us who have to look at this and try to figure out or determine which laws are going to be affected.
Yeah, well, I think Jason's comments about what the ACLU is up to, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's what they have out in the open.
Mm-hmm.
Shows that they really have this all targeted, and even what Jason was saying about how they've subtly changed the language as they've gone from state to state, it's showing that they're saying, hey, why are we spending all this money to get an amendment that's very focused, and then we still have to get something else going? Let's just put it all in one, and let's try and get those poor suckers in Ohio to take the bait.
So there's two I'd like to add just briefly. One is there was a Supreme Court case in 2000, Bostock versus Clayton County, and what it said was that the drafter's opinion of a law did not narrow or did not prevent the law from being extended to other purposes. So the final conclusion of that court case was actually saying that that it didn't matter what the drafter's opinion was of what this constitutional amendment would do, but rather every individual was entitled to the full rights and to the full benefits of that law. And so in the state of Ohio, when they're introducing a constitutional amendment that will do all these things, we do not need the ACLU to tell us that this is their goal, although we actually have evidence that this is their goal. But we don't need them to say that, because that Supreme Court case from 3 years ago is evidence enough that every individual is entitled to the full benefits of whatever the law says. So in this case, the law would empower all those things that we just talked about to become the standard in the state of Ohio.
I think, Jason, you've had some success with some of these topics, right? Talking to local pastors. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that, how this impacts them, kind of like it's impacting us, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've talked with many people across the state about these issues, and one of the things that we've seen is even amongst people who are okay with removal of parental rights, which is shocking, or okay with abortion up to the moment of birth, which is also shocking, they still have a huge problem with the adult-child sexual relationships becoming legal. And they still have a huge problem with the prostitution with no age restriction becoming legal here in the state of Ohio. So what we're seeing is that even people who originally signed the initiative petition that allowed this constitutional amendment to even be presented as a ballot initiative here in the state of Ohio, we've seen some of those people say, I'm going to vote against it because I did not understand that it would do all these things. But when they did understand it, they said, I'm against those things. We cannot say yes to that. We must say no. So do we want to lose our parental rights? Of course not. The answer is no. Do we want adult-child sexual relationships legalized in the state of Ohio? Of course, the answer is no. Do we want to allow this prostitution with no age restriction in the state of Ohio, the most permissive place on earth to do so? The answer is, of course, no. And do we want to allow those who are impregnated to have the option of killing their child in the womb up to the moment of birth if it's for their mental health or emotional health? I declare that the answer should be no. And so here we are stating no in issue 1. because of these types of things that are going to be done. And one extra thing, we actually saw a Supreme Court case from 2003 where the ACLU wrote an amicus brief. Now, the amicus brief had nothing to do with abortion, but they decided to include abortion because they said it dealt with personal autonomy. What was that situation? That situation was Lawrence versus Texas. And if you look through it, Lawrence versus Texas, two men having relations had nothing to do with abortion, but the ACLU decided to say that that was a reason that we had to allow abortion. They almost quote issue 1 word for word. What we now see in the constitutional amendment as issue 1, that first line, that first section, is almost word for word to the to what the ACLU wrote in an amicus brief 20 years ago. So this is something that they have linked together for a long time, and all we are doing is saying we believe them, this is their plan, and we are against it.
Amen.
Awesome. That's great. Hey, Jason, so like, do you have, you might have mentioned some, but yeah, provide us some links on how people can see some of all this information that you and your, I assume, team had been, collecting, and how they can help you, and just get educated on this, right? And we can use this as part of our communication on issue 1 in general, right? So why it's not as simple as what it is out to be, because of all the reasons we just talked about, and the evil that's out there, and it's just crazy, right? So if you can provide.
Well, yes, I believe that Damon has some resources of links that we have, and I'm sure he'll make them available. But we have a website that is immediately available that people can click on. We have a QR code that people can link to and find all the evidence for themselves. They can read through the documents, they can read through the evidence, and go ahead and understand that this is a major situation that the state of Ohio is dealing with.
All right, great, thank you.
Matt, you got anything to wrap up with? And then
Just thank you for joining us tonight and sharing all your knowledge with us. I appreciate it personally, and I know everybody else does.
I don't, because I'm not going to sleep as good now. No, I do appreciate it. It's great work.
yeah, Jason, thanks so much for being with us, and hopefully this will reach a lot of people, a lot more people. And you're doing it. You're out there and you're reaching people, getting out in the flesh to meet people, right? That's the important thing, folks. It's going to take talking to your neighbor, talking to the people that you wouldn't normally talk to, and taking the time that doesn't seem to always be the appropriate time to say, hey, vote against this thing, because it's going to be a wrecking ball, not just on Ohio, but on the nation. With that, Eric Alberts, Matt Doc Truman, Dean Glover for Ohio Election Forum, very special guest star, bold warrior for the unborn, Jason Feliciano. Thanks for joining us tonight. God bless you all.